Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now the other day we looked at an old AMD FX gaming pre-built, and during that video I said I'd retest the 8320 CPU with a more powerful graphics card. The FX chips certainly didn't share the same popularity and praise that the following Ryzen CPUs received, but having owned a couple of different models over the years, I would say that I regard the lineup as a whole as okay. The FX 8320 here is no exception, and thanks to its unlocked multiplier it can be overclocked quite easily. I slapped this one in my Asus 970 board and took it straight to 4.4 GHz without even touching the voltage settings. Truth be told, no amount of overclocking is likely to help this thing in 2022, so for a laugh and to mark what might be my last AMD FX video on the channel, I decided to pair it with an RTX 2080 Super just to see what the processor can do when given room to really stretch its legs. Whether gaming at 1080p, 1440p or 4K, we were still heavily CPU bound, so nothing really changed. The GPU had to put in extra work for sure, but no matter the resolution, we couldn't escape the stranglehold that the FX had on our system. Therefore, I just decided to proceed with good old 1080p. I tested the following games with settings that the 2080 Super would otherwise have no problems with if it were to be paired with a newer, more capable processor, starting with COD Warzone. This actually did alright. Bear in mind that this sort of hardware combination doesn't make much sense in the real world. I mean, you might upgrade to a high-end GPU before you've had a chance to swap out your processor, so you might find yourself in a situation like this, but if you have an FX CPU and don't plan on upgrading it anytime soon, don't go out and buy a high-end graphics card specifically to pair with this chip. That said, there's no denying here that performance was actually okay. I dread to think just how many frames we're missing out on, but all that matters in this moment is that we're averaging 60 FPS. Cyberpunk is a mixed bag. On one hand we have an awfully stuttery experience, and on the other we get a plus 60 FPS, sometimes closer to 80 FPS scenario, whereby the FX and 2080 get on like crumble and custard. What really kills the experience is Night City. The NPCs and general busyness of the map just destroy any remnants of smoothness that we could achieve outside of the downtown and industrial districts. We've covered Elden Ring with older CPU architectures before, the FX 8320 is no exception. The experience here wasn't terrible, and it could be made to feel a lot better with a 30 FPS cap in place, but it almost feels illegal capping any game to 30 FPS when you've got an RTX graphics card in your system. There were actually some drops below 30 as well, so overall, while Elden Ring is playable, it will become less enjoyable in certain areas of the map, particularly those denser zones. I've got no complaints with Forza Horizon 5 outside of the usual missing textures issue that seems to be associated with data streaming. My game is on an SSD and it always has been, but the error warning I get does mention limited CPU resources as a potential culprit for this issue. This didn't last long, everything loaded, and overall the average was pretty good. 70 FPS at ultra settings is very impressive. It's not as far as the RTX is concerned, but considering the 8320 is keeping up to an extent, I can't complain too much. Don't get me wrong, it's still quite clearly the limiting factor here. Halo Infinite, just like Forza, didn't really exhibit too many issues. We're still talking 90 to 100% CPU utilization and about half of that for the GPU, but the game averaged at least 60 FPS and I can't moan about that. The FX and RTX experience in 2022 is okay. It's not terrible and it's not good. It's satisfactory in most cases. Not recommendable, but doable. To finalise then, it's Red Dead. This also runs pretty well. It's just towns and settlements that can cripple performance. Things get busy and the FX just can't handle it very well. We're not going from 60 to say under 30 FPS, it's not quite that extreme, but even if we didn't have the FPS counter on, these dips could and would certainly be felt by the player. To conclude, this video was more about doing something for the sake of it, a what if scenario. If you have an FX chip, you probably don't want to buy anything outside of a mid-range graphics card to pair it with, but it is nice to see that the 8320 here isn't completely useless, though a bit of a boost to the frequency will certainly help. Thank you for watching this one then. If you enjoyed it, leave a like down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Let me know if you still use an FX processor in 2022 and what you think of it in the comments down below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.